How does borderline feel like? It's one of the most basic questions someone can ask me that has borderline. And just the other day, when I was asked that question too by a friend who I just recently told about my diagnosis, I struggled answering. And it's not very really strange, because I have borderline, and that is the normal state of my mind, as far as at least the recent years. So I would have been completely unable to answer it with any real answer if it wasn't for the fact that I have become a lot better in recent time, in recent months actually. So I have a new baseline. That's what I'm trying to get at. The baseline of how something feels and what is different from it. That is the thing, really. And then there's another thing about borderline. It is different in different individuals, of course. It is very dependent on what level of borderline you have, what stage it is in, and the comorbidities, the other things you probably also have. And if you look at borderline defined as science defines it now, it is a part of personality syndrome. It is always connected to other things. So the question, how does borderline feel like? In my case, borderline feels like the other variables flaring up. That my anxiety flares up, that the depression flares up, that I struggle with keeping my mood leveled and balanced. I react very fast. Emotionally, I simply am not a logical, reasonable individual at all times. And I also feel this strange emptiness, this strange void in my inside myself. And I feel, of course, also I struggle with my sense of self. That aspect is probably the most vague one to define. I mean, if you never felt anything similar to it, it's really hard to explain. The other things, I'm pretty sure most people have gone through things that reminds of depression and anxiety and so on. I mean, very few people are blessed of living a life without problems, without issues, even if these things are not necessarily comparable with the amount of struggle you have when you suffer from these things fully, like a condition, anxiety and depression especially, which are the most handicapped things of these things, at least at the basic level. So, how does depression feels like? Well, most of you probably know who listen to this. I'm pretty sure I don't have many listeners and viewers of the channel that doesn't know what depression is. It is probably a given thing, really. So imagine depression as a base level. Imagine just feeling very deep void inside, hollow, and without sense of purpose and so on. And imagine if you have other things going on, which you usually do, you're probably going to feel those flare up a lot and very easily. I don't know that many people with borderline, at least not officially, but those I know of, they most certainly struggle with their other conditions a lot harder when the borderline flares up, because you lose control. Borderline is like the turbo of your engine. Let's put it that way. The thing that makes everything else really, really bad. Really, really powerful, that is. Really, really, really strong. So, that's the best way I can put it. Borderline is like the turbo of an engine. So, kind of depends on what engine you have. If your engine is normal and steady and fine in all other aspects, then I can't really explain how that would feel like. But if you have ADHD, if you have a tendency to have anxiety, if you're hypersensitive, and if you are depressive and so on, all those things flare up. That's what it feels like. And it's also a stage of, how should I put it? It's a strange feeling of not being in control, really. Kind of know that, hey, this thing that's happening now is not logical. It is way beyond what it should be. I'm not reacting to this in a normal way. I'm kind of, flinching completely strange. That is also a feeling you have when you have borderline. So, without actually analyzing yourself, which you must do to get a diagnosis, and you must do so professionally, really, to be sure, because there are things that are similar. Without doing that, your feelings are maybe a bit misleading sometimes, and I wouldn't recommend using that to draw any conclusions, but it's a start. So, borderline feels like you have a mutiny, at least in my case, a mutiny of the mind, where things aren't really in control as they should be. That's the short answer. You know something is wrong. You know that this isn't supposed to be like this. I'm supposed to be in control, and so on. And this is also one of the reasons that some therapies, some methods of therapy, could actually be harmful to you. Could actually be, harmful. You shouldn't dig. You shouldn't dig into the feelings too deep without knowing what you're doing if you have borderline. I'm actually going to say you should never do it, really, because it's like opening a tap, and the tap is kind of broken. So when you start doing it, it's very difficult to control the flow. So don't do it. Be careful with psychotherapy that is focused on discussing and venting your feelings without analyzing them. That could be detrimental, and that is why many people who are misdiagnosed, maybe with depression, is common, because the feeling you feel is very often depression. Those people will get worse because, the way to deal with depression sometimes, depending on the therapy you are attending and the therapist you're attending and just your general life, is to vent, to talk about the things and so on. And if you do this in an uncontrolled way, in an uncontrolled manner, without a therapist who can observe what is going on and knows that you have borderline, well, then this might be very, very much a thing that will worsen everything. That is my, at least, experience, my personal experience. So, how does borderline feel like? It feels like you have lost control of the ship. The logical, reasonable captain is tucked away on the ship, frustrated and can't really do anything. And instead you have a crew of your other conditions, which you probably have some of them. They are now running the ship. That is the crew of depression, it's the crew of anxiety, it's the crew of basically being procrastinated, it's the crew of all kinds of stupid things, and it's the panic attack crew, of course. All of those are in control instead. That's how it feels like. So, I'm not sure this video helps anyone, but it is difficult to explain how borderline feels like if you don't have a baseline that is different. I do. I haven't had borderline all my life, not the least flaring up, and I don't really feel it affecting me very hard right now. So that's my answer, my personal answer. The mutiny of the ship. So, but if you suspect you have borderline, you should talk to people who are knowledgeable in this, and by knowledgeable I mean professionals. You should say to them, hey, I think something is wrong here. I don't think it's just anxiety. I don't think it's just depression. I think it's something else going on. Because doing a diagnosis is not just simply showing up to a psychiatrist and they will instantly spot what's wrong with you. It is actually, a lot of the work is, in many cases, you being able to tell the right story, to say the right things, and knowing that, hey, wait a minute, that thing going on in my mind is actually a very good variable to define that I have borderline. So, if you think you have borderline, if things I've said feels familiar, or you know someone else in your surrounding that you suspect have borderline, well then it is in your interest to before you seek professional help, try to read up on it. I've done a lot of material here on my channel, but there's a lot of good, easy, more structured reading on the net on the criteria, the 9 criteria, and so on. And you should read those. And you should bring these criteria and those you feel you match to the attention of the professional you talk to. And that is the way to start your process to heal. And that is a long process. That can take years. If it ever works, it can take years. And but anyways, just a little basic reflection on something that is actually surprisingly hard to explain. So, useful for me as well, not only for beginners. It is useful to reflect on the most simple and basic questions sometimes. Like, how does borderline feel like? Anyways, this is the Borderline Man signing off.